It's on RN Drive. And let's go to Hong Kong in what's been described as a blow for democracy there. There are plans to slash the number of democratically elected seats available on local district councils. This proposal was announced by Hong Kong's Chief Executive John Lee this week, and it's been widely seen as a move by Beijing to increase control over the former British colony. Tom Grundy is the Editor-in-Chief at the Hong Kong Free Press. Tom, welcome to you. It's great to have you. It's hard to forget the pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong and the movement's landslide victory in local elections back in 2019. But before we get to this week's proposed changes, how significant were those 2019 elections?
Hi, Andy. Well, yeah, I think the government were taken aback when, during the height long protests and unrest, Hong Kongers came out in unprecedented numbers and voted through the opposition, and all but one district government. I think the authorities thought that the public had turned against the movement at that stage because of scenes of tear gas from police and Molotovs, from frontline protesters happening practically daily. But it showed that the movement still had huge support, citizens, taking the opportunity to send a message, literally popping champagne in the streets after the victory as a vote of confidence in the movement.
Many of these pro-democracy district councillors resigned in 2021 after authorities introduced an oath-taking requirement to basically make them take a pledge of allegiance to the city. How was this requirement perceived at the time?
Well, I think it was a number of factors, but supporters seem to perhaps understand the move. I mean, dozens of pro-democracy councillors resigned at that stage, as it was just months after the imposition of the national security law that carries up to life in prison. And this new requirement for, oaths of allegiance, it also involved the authorities considering the past conduct of these Democrats when they reviewed the pledge. And, this is a city where you can be jailed for a tweet or a Facebook post or possessing a certain flag or uttering a certain phrase. And again, it was the context of 47 Democrats in the legislative elections that had been arrested. So I think in hindsight, now that we see that most of the opposition in Hong Kong are behind bars or they've fled the city or have quit politics, I imagine a lot of their supporters understood the move at the time.
So talk to me about today's proposal. How many directly elected seats will be available at the next elections?
Well, it's complicated, perhaps deliberately so, but sit tight because it's a handbook, I guess, really on how once free elections were brought under government control. These were the last vestiges of universal suffrage, in the city. So this November, only 88 of the seats in the local elections will be directly elected by the public. That's just 20% compared to the 452 in the last poll. Now, the government calls that an improvement to prevent, as it puts it, black violence after the 2019 unrest and protests. And now 179 seats are going to be just directly selected by the city's leader, John Lee. 27 seats for rural officials, they're going to remain. And then 176 seats, they're going to be chosen by local crime, fire safety and area committees. All of those committees actually are chosen by a government official also. And it doesn't stop there. They are redrawing the constituency boundaries, a tactic we might see elsewhere in the world, but they're also reducing the number of them from 452 to 44. And all candidates will be pre-screened and undergo national security checks. Like I say, this is a city where you can be jailed over a social media post or whatnot. So simply by entering, you're going to trigger an investigation into yourself. And finally, these councils are going to be chaired by a government official. Now, that's despite the basic law, the mini-constitution, stating that the government is meant to consult the councils for guidance rather than the other way around.
Yeah, you're right. It is very complicated. Perhaps it was best summed up by Chief Executive John Lee, who said, and I quote, "I do not agree that pure counting of election votes means democracy. Different places have their own systems that must take into consideration all the characteristics and all the elements of that place." I mean that's pretty stark. How have locals reacted to these comments? Has there been much reaction?
Well, for the reasons I just mentioned, no, it's been rather muted, at least within Hong Kong's borders. There is a lot of opposition figures, activist groups, etc., that are overseas who've obviously spoken out. But what we did see was the Democratic Party, who have clung on for dear life, saying that they are very disappointed with these changes. John Lee, by the way, he was actually being asked by a journalist if the government lacked confidence in that the number of democratically elected members is going to be lower than in colonial times. And Lee himself, a former police and security official, he instantly took aim at the journalists, actually, for using the word protest in 2019 rather than riots, as the government now perceives them. But on top of this, the ex-leader, C.Y. Leung, said it was not even necessary for Hong Kong to hold elections for these local administrators. And another pro-Beijing heavyweight, Rita Fan, she was a bit more explicit and said that the pro-democracy landslide, a few years ago, made her very afraid, and that people might make the wrong decisions, and therefore, these democratically elected seats have to be slashed for the city's self-protection.
So, in essence, Tom, where does this leave democracy in Hong Kong? Because those sweeping national security laws in 2020 effectively put an end to protest, didn't they? So how do you answer that question of what's left of democracy in Hong Kong?
Well, perhaps not a lot, and I'm not sure it's much of a bright future for those who are pro-democracy minded. We have seen over 250 arrests under the national security law, where you will see no jury, hand-picked judges, and up to life in prison. There's been over 400,000 reports to the National Security Hotline. At least 9 media outlets have shuttered out of fear or, following police raids and arrests. We're seeing, today's Press Freedom Day, and we're seeing journalists behind bars for the first time in what once was, a very free and open city. Nearly 60 civil society groups have disbanded. And as we saw on Labour Day here on Monday, protests, despite COVID rules being relaxed, are still very difficult to come across. They are outright banned, or organisers are seemingly pressured to cancel them. So, Hong Kong is being treated perhaps as another troublesome periphery by Beijing, along with, Xinjiang or Tibet. And as much as the city, it's a financial centre, is seeking to relaunch itself post-COVID, its international, reputation has taken a battering. And for critics and opposition voices, the future for now is abroad if they are not already behind bars.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you giving us a window into these latest changes to, as you say, what's left of democracy in Hong Kong. Tom Grundy is the editor-in-chief at Hong Kong Free Press. Thank you for your time.